if you're going to forget some things, it's good. Particularly if you forget unpleasant experiences of your life, you're much better emotionally and psychologically. You agree, sir? Yeah, thank you. I think as the questions come, we'll talk more.
So thank you, Geshe. I will request you to now you give your comments.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ranjanji, and all the panelists here, and respected the Secretary of TIFAC, and all the observers here. So basically, I have a few points to make. One, why do we have to explore whether or not there is a mind which is different from the brain? Rather than starting by saying that, oh, there should be the mind should be different from the brain. Oh, no, the brain is the mind. In the first place, why do we have to explore that? This is a question. And if there's no specific purpose, reason, then we can just forget about studying about mind. Just study brain and that's it. But in actuality, if we think of, say, what Charles Darwin's position, his discovery, I wouldn't say discovery, his hypothesis. One, that human beings, we evolved, our brains evolved, and now we are gifted with the instinct of anger, attachment, and so forth. And this instinct, which we are gifted with through millions of years of evolution, that allows us to dispel or expel what is harmful to you, and the attachment or desire, which is going to be the equipment to acquire what you want. So this is how we live. This is Charles Darwin's hypothesis. In case if the world follows this hypothesis, believing that this is the reality, what is the consequence? If there is no bad consequence, well, then what is fine? There's nothing wrong in it. But imagine, according to this hypothesis, anger is something which we cannot eliminate because this is instinct. If this is correct, and if this is what everyone believes, then people will not strive to eliminate anger. Then without striving to eliminate anger, this anger will give rise to hatred. And the hatred will give rise to terrorism. And this terrorism is the cause of the disaster now. So imagine what the President of India said. There is no good terrorism, bad terrorism. All terrorism is bad terrorism. And then he cited all these examples of the recent terrorism. Just imagine all these things. So behind all these intellectual discussions, if we are not careful, then there's a serious repercussions in the humanity. There's a crisis which are following that. So therefore, this issue, whether or not there's a mind which is different from the brain, this is a huge and very important topic to be discussed. One. Now the next question. Now what is the reality, whether or not there's a mind which is different from the brain? I read Eric Kandel's book, In Search of Memory. Eric Kandel, who is Nobel laureate in 2004 in physiology.
Great neuroscientist.
He put forth two hypotheses. He said, just in the opening passage of the book, according to the current neuroscientists, hypothesis 1, there is no mind, it's just a brain. Hypothesis 2, there is mind, but it's the emergent property of the brain. So these are the two hypotheses which he set forth in the opening passage of his book. Now the next question, whether or not there is a mind which is different from the brain, or whether or not our mind or the brain, what we call as the mind, whatever, whether the anger and the negative emotions which the Dr. M. Gauri Devi so beautifully mentioned, the emotional world, whether these emotions such as hatred, anger, jealousy and so forth, are they something instinct or inherent, developed over the last millions of years? in the human realm? These are all the questions. So that is a huge discussion, and I like to share as many points on this, but then I simply want to restrain myself with this to jump to the next point. The next point is I personally believe, and this is my take, that science is such a rigorous system. Science is such a rigorous system. Physics, chemistry, biology, and nowadays particularly neuroscience, they are such a rigorous system. And this system, it has its own incredible strength and beauty. We must not dilute that by mixing with other disciplines. What I'm saying here is that while neuroscience is so deep an inquiry into the human brain, it should not be mixed with physics and chemistry. It should not be mixed with spirituality. At the same time, it doesn't mean that neuroscience is the whole story of the humanity. Neuroscience is one story of the humanity. Because the reality, human beings, as all the panelists mentioned, is such a complex system. It's not just a simple system. It's a very complex system. So complex that the biology is involved, chemistry, the chemical reactions are involved, then the physics, the elemental particles involved. Every complexities are there. As such, it is very important to keep in mind what is known as the three divisions of reality. Three divisions of reality. One is the evident phenomena, and the other one is the obscured phenomena, and the third one is a very obscured phenomena. Three. And all these three, we the human beings, we are constituted of all these three complexities, the complexity of the evident phenomena, the obscure phenomena, and very hidden, very obscure phenomena. So what is it constituted of the evident phenomena? Evident phenomena is those things which we can measure, which we can easily see, which we can quantify them by means of the modern technology. All these things, they fall under the category of the evident phenomena. So what science, the present-day science is doing, is tackling the first phenomena, the evident phenomena. And I would very much, this is my very strong belief that the modern science should be confined to that for the time being, with this evident phenomena. And yet, as I said earlier, that the human beings, it is not just this, constituted of this evident phenomenon. It has so much complexities there. Hidden phenomena is also there, hidden phenomena or obscure phenomena. Obscure phenomena, for example, how with quantum physics, how the electrons behave. If you are to measure, quantitatively measure, as to what is the velocity of the electron, what is the position of the electron at what particular time, it has to be considered only in relation to the observer. So it's the observer-observed relationship. So that plays such an important role. So this is not something that simply by looking through the machines, we can see things. So it must be, the observer should be brought in. So look, physics has now coming into a paradigm shift. We see a paradigm shift in physics happening. Now the next point is that this issue of the mind, and this issue of the identity, the self-identity, identity as a self, I. So we see that each one of us, if you're not interested in this talk, you will simply leave. If you're very interested, you will stay till the end. What determines that? There's a sense of I. This sense of I determines whether you ought to stay here, whether you go, whether you have to grab a chocolate, whether you grab alcohol, whatever. So this sense of I plays a very important role. At the same time, if you reduce the sense of I to just physical, small structure, brain, then it's very dangerous. Very dangerous. So therefore, to make it very short, out of the three kinds of the phenomena in which everything falls into, evident phenomena, then the slightly obscure phenomena, and the very obscure phenomena. Of the three, science as of now is dealing with the first one, mainly the first one, right? So, whereas we should not forget the second and the third one. If you forget these two, then it may take us to very serious repercussions. The next point that I'd like to share with you here is that then what exactly is mind? This is a question which had been in the realm of mystery for the last many millennia. What is mind? This question. Okay, so the mind, we are not supposed to think of something which is something mystical up there which we don't understand. To make it very simple, mind, say for example, let's all think of India Gate now. Let's all think of India Gate. India Gate is not there, but you could sense, you could imagine India Gate in your mind. And then, as our here the speaker professor, Professor Neeraj Jain, he said, now we can detect what you're thinking. Initially, how did this happen? How was it evolved to this stage of complexity where the scientists are able to detect what you're thinking? Initially, you may be thinking about India Gate, and then you are put in the fMRI scan. So there, the scientists could see the brain waves in the computer, but you cannot see the brain waves. You have the first-hand experience of what you are thinking. Oh, I'm thinking of India Gate. You know the mental process, you don't see the brain process. The scientists see the brain process, the scientist doesn't see the mental process. And then the scientist would ask you, what are you thinking? I'm thinking of India Gate. Okay, with this brain wave, it corresponds to India Gate. So this is how it started. So therefore now, we may say, oh, now you are thinking of apple. Or now you may think of your mother, right? So this all started by initially corresponding with what you are thinking and what the brain waves that we could see on the screen, right? So we see that what you are experiencing, which the scientists cannot read, this is known as mind. What you are experiencing, what the scientists cannot see, is mind. What you cannot see, what the scientists will see, is the brain. This is the distinction, right? Now, in this regard, the next question arises. Now, how can we say that whether or not this mind is the emergent property of the brain? This is the next question. Whether or not the mind is the emergent property of the brain. We should not begin by saying that, oh, the mind is not the emergent property of the brain. The mind is different. No, we should not start with this. So, there must be reasons, rationalities, very convincing rationalities to feel that the mind is indeed distinct from the brain. Then we see that, oh, because the mind is so distant from the brain, and the brain which is so limited in the physical nature, so the mind, on the other hand, it can have incredible potential to grow, right? So, as our Dr. M. Gauri Devi said, sometimes it is good to forget things, right? So, the thing is that here, if you are, as here, the secretary of TIFAC said, the wisdom. If we develop the wisdom, then more the knowledge that you have, better you are in a position to help others, to tackle situations. Say, if you have so many things, and then these thoughts, bad memories, they give rise to pain in you. Then because of this, then next time somebody, because of recollection of the past, bad experiences, then the person is in pain and trauma, then you can empathize with the person. Whereas if you forget it, then you have no pain, and then when the other person is going through traumatic experience, you cannot empathize. So here the wisdom plays an important role. Wisdom plays a very important role. Okay, so then now the brain and the mind. So I can't really go into detail as to how I have, for the last 30-something years, explored into whether or not the mind is different from the brain. So now one very quick summary which I like to make here is that the physical brain and the mind, one of the great Buddhist logician and epistemologist and a psychologist, Acharya Dharmakirti, what he said was that the brain and the mind, these two are very closely connected. These two are mutually dependent. When you affect the brain, it can affect the mind. When you affect the mind, it can affect the brain. This is nowadays, at one point in time, say like 20, 30 years ago, there was a belief amongst the neuroscientists that it's not a mutuality, it's a linear. Whether you affect the brain and the mind is affected, that's it. Not that the mind is affected and the brain is affected. That one is, the reverse is not there in the 20, 30 years back in time. Now the scientists, with the research happening in America, this is what is being discovered. This is what is being talked more. It's not just the linear fashion where you affect the brain and the mind is affected. That is for sure happening. At the same time, you affect the mind and the brain is affected. With meditation, your brain is affected and the new neuronal circuits and synapses, very stable synaptic connections are being created because of this, long-term meditations and so forth. So affecting the mind can affect the physical brain. So this is what is being discovered nowadays. Then, so from that point of view, what I like to share with you is that with the brain and the mind relationship, the mind, in the Buddhist psychology, there is explanation of how the mind has so many layers. What we are experiencing now is very gross. And then when we sleep, it becomes subtler. And then when you faint, it becomes even subtler. At the time of death, it becomes even subtler. So there's so much diversity, variance in subtlety. Now, interestingly, as the mind becomes more and more subtler, as the mind becomes more and more subtler, it becomes more and more independent of the physical brain. This is one thing that we need to know. As the mind becomes subtler and subtler, it becomes more and more independent from the brain. So there are techniques and methods by which to deliberately make your mind subtler. And then you could feel that your mind is becoming independent of the physical brain. And then about this last point, what can we download everything, all things on a brain? Okay, and then can you take one, consume one, tablet?
Pills.
One pill, compassion pill, and you become very compassionate like Dalai Lama. Or you take the pill for the physics, you become the next Albert Einstein, right? His Holiness the Dalai Lama jokingly said, I remember that, I think in the West, in America, he said that if that is possible, I will be the first person to sign up to buy this pill. This is what His Holiness jokingly said, right? So what I'm saying is that the distinction between the pills, taking the pill and then the person, become very compassionate, very possible. At the same time, there's a distinction. With the pills, as long as the effect is there, the person feels compassionate and tender, soft. The moment the pill is gone, then the person goes back to the same rudeness,
Correct.
cruelness. Whereas this change happening through mental practice, meditation, that experience is very stable and it stays. Thank you.
Now we open the floor for discussion. That's what we wanted. So please. Shamrud.
I want to ask Dr. M. Ravidevi, what should be the role of family members what should be the role of family members towards a person who is shy in socializing, who doesn't want to interact? Shy in socializing.
Shy in socializing.
Doesn't want to interact with other people, wants to remain alone. And what should be done to transform him so that his behavior becomes normal?
Well, firstly, one has to find out the cause of shyness. It could be just a behavior, or it could reflect a disease like a depression. So, firstly, one should consult a psychiatrist or a psychologist and find out, The reasons for this isolation, one wants to be alone, not go out. If it is just a personality pattern, then it can be changed through counseling by a psychologist, and the parents are taught how to do it. But firstly, we must recognize whether it is a routine behavior pattern or it's a part of a disease, a mental disease. I think that's important.
Thank you.
What you said, Mr. Damdar, is then the mind the soul? And secondly, mind drives the brain or brain drives the
Both ways.
mind?
Both ways.
Thank you. Whether or not the mind is the soul, this is a very serious question. I like to make it very simple, particularly in discussion like this or in the academic area. So there, I always encourage people to, tackle those things which is within the bound, which is within your ability to convince others of the existence of that phenomenon. So the mind, as I said earlier, is, say you think of India Gate, you're thinking of it. So that agent with which you are aware that I'm thinking of, this is known as mind. And some people, they think that thing, the agent which thinks, this is a mind, this is soul. Some people, they interpret it this way. So if this is the case, then I would say mind and soul, these two are the same. Whereas others, they may not interpret it this way. Soul is something which is different from the mind. Soul is something which we cannot experience. Some philosophers, they explain it like this. If that is the case, then the mind and soul, these two are different, and what we are discussing here is the mind. Then the next one, whether or not the mind drives, whether it is the mind which drives the brain or the brain which drives the mind. So these two are more, as I said, a mutuality of driving. There's a mutuality of dependence. At times, the brain can drive the mind. So, for example, this is a typical example given there in the Buddhist psychology. Say when there's a brain damage, then the person can lose the speech. The person can, even the sense of empathy disappears at times, and you lose your language. You may not lose your speech, but then you may lose your language. These things happen. So this is how the brain drives the mind. At times, there are mind which drives the brain. So through deliberate thinking, not through physical changing of the brain, but deliberate thinking, new synaptic connections are created. Very stable new synaptic connections created. And the indication of that is twofold. One, physically you can diagnose that. And then number two, you can see that at times, without any effort, you can spontaneously invoke those experiences. Those experiences, which are clear indication that some kind of stable change in the brain, synaptic, connection has occurred. Yeah. So it's mutuality.
The question was very good and thought-stimulating. It's both ways. As a doctor, I will tell you the examples. The concept of psychoneuroimmunology, the word, has evolved over the time. Our Ayurvedic physicians recognized long ago that deep interaction between the mind and the body, mind, brain, and body. But I think the modern doctors like us, we didn't recognize it for many years. Now we know that if a person is agitated, angry, over the time, if the same personality continues, you can check the blood pressures at different times. The blood pressure will rise. That's part of the thing. Or your bowel movements may be faster, called irritable bowel syndrome. One could get headache, one could get pains. That is how the mind influences the brain to various mechanisms, and the brain affects the heart, bowel, etc. Okay, that's quite easy. Now, the brain affecting the mind, there are numerous examples in the history of neurosciences and what we see. If you damage a particular area of the brain called the hippocampus, your memories of recent memory goes, but the old memory may remain. The behavior may change. The famous example of Brenda Milner, who was a neuropsychologist at the Montreal Neurological Institute, she saw a patient who had a road traffic injury. He was in US and she was called from Montreal because she was a fantastic neuropsychologist. This man was an engineer. He had injury on both the sides. I think he had epilepsy and the surgery was done. He would continue to be active. He could draw the diagrams, etc. But when his attention was drawn, let's say a telephone rang, he would answer that